This book is the anatomy of what a great business success looks like.
His research showed everybody gets stuck. And funny enough, when you're stuck, you feel like they're the only person in the world who is stuck.
Good day and welcome to the Consultant and the Coach podcast. How are you, my friend?
Hey, doing great. How are you, sir?
Yeah, I'm awesome, man. Hey, we love books.
Yep.
We like doing business together. And we have another podcast today. And we're going to take apart the book, Anatomy of a Breakthrough by Adam Alter.
Yep. Mm-hmm.
And we interviewed him last week. It was a fascinating interview. Mm-hmm. And so now this is our chance to, we're going to give our take on his book. Mm-hmm. And then next week we have our business application and then life application.
That's
so
right. Yep.
Props to Adam for last week's interview. What is the Bible verse you came up for today?
Yeah, I'm getting it up here. Psalm 13. Lord, how long will you forget me? Forever? How long will you hide your face from me? How long will I store up anxious concerns within me? Agony in my mind every day. How long will my enemy dominate me? Consider me and answer, Lord my God. Restore brightness to my eyes, otherwise I will sleep in death. My enemy will say, I have triumphed over him, and my foes will rejoice because I am shaken. But I have trusted in your faithful love. My heart will rejoice in your deliverance. I will sing to the Lord because he has treated me graciously. And I like this in context of getting a breakthrough, because obviously before you have a breakthrough, you're going to be stuck. And a lot of the book is about the psychology of stuckness. But obviously as Christian business leaders and those who listen to us, obviously there's faith plays an important element. And so when we're stuck, I think many times Scripture reminds us that when we're feeling that way, there's an element of crying out to God, which is totally fine and acceptable and normal.
And so anyone who's read the Psalms, this is what we see in the Psalms.
That's right.
You get stuck. You get stuck. This is going to happen. This is going to happen. You see it over and over and over again. And the book, Anatomy of a Breakthrough, is like, well, how do you get unstuck from a business perspective?
Right. And when you think about the Psalms of Lament, I think one of the keys to remember is, regardless of when you have that breakthrough, and regardless if you ever have that breakthrough, the key is at the end of this, again, before the breakthrough has happened, David reminds us that he declares his trust and his faith. He says, I've trusted in your love. My heart will rejoice in your deliverance. I will sing to the Lord. But this is before he gets unstuck. So this isn't okay, now everything's fine, so I'll praise the Lord. It's even from the places of stuckness. I like that word. We need to, as people of faith, we also must praise the Lord, right? The Lord gives, the Lord takes away. Blessed be the name of the Lord. So these are important things to remember as we talk about these topics.
Absolutely. So book Anatomy of the Breakthrough. And the nice thing I like about this book is we got to talk to Adam first, hear his perspective, not only on what the book's about, but why he wrote the book the way he did. And it makes complete sense hearing his perspective on the book. So how would you summarize the book?
Yeah, I think it was a good book because it was a really helpful construct for thinking about all the different ways that we get stuck. As I've described it to people who I've talked to a lot of people about the book, even because it's come up in conversation. It applies to so many great things in business and life, which I appreciate. His research showed things like everybody gets stuck, and funny enough, when you're stuck, you feel like they're the only person in the world who is stuck, right? And so you forget that virtually everyone feels stuck in some dimension of their life. And so I appreciated that you can really apply this to any area, and it doesn't mean that, you're always you'll never be stuck again, but at least you can apply it to when you get stuck in, family relationship or, working relationship or a partnership or a client or, there's all these places you get stuck. So there's certainly lots of good ideas to draw from.
And now he teaches at the business school at New York University. And so it's not like he's just doing this from his own life experience. He works with business leaders, aspiring business leaders. So he gets to see case study after case study after case study. And what this book did is he summarized all this data and says, it's not just like, hey, this might work. No, this is the actual anatomy of what a breakthrough looks like. Just like when you think anatomy class going into med school, it's not like, hey, this might work for treating some sort of illness. Doctors know this is what the anatomy of the body looks like, and this is how you get a healthy body. This book is the anatomy of what a great business success looks like. And you do this in consulting. You go into a business and you're like, okay, what's the pain point? Can we grow from this? And what does that look like?
Sure. Yeah, all the time. I also liked, he brought up, we actually didn't have time to talk about in the interview, but he brought up at the end when we, asked, what else didn't we talk about? I was somewhat surprised that one of the things he zeroed in on that we hadn't addressed was the concept of the friction audit, which actually, I had a lot of notes in my notes to cover with him. So it wasn't that we hadn't read it. We just didn't get to that topic. I was a little surprised that he highlighted, that was interesting, like a nugget that he thought was obviously very important. And what did you think about that?
I loved it. I loved it in a way that I didn't like it. And what I mean by that is, so not only am I a coach and you're a consultant, but we want businesses to improve, but frequently they don't improve until there's some sort of friction. You need to find what does it take to move it forward. And to do that, there's got to be some sort of friction. What is slowing the business down? What is the friction? And he mentions this in the book. And I went back to my business and I'm looking at my business going, yep. So I started asking, where's the friction? I know where the friction is because I talk to my customers almost every single day. And yeah, they tell me where the friction is. We might as well ahead of time do a friction audit like what he said and said, where is that friction? And can we alleviate some of that friction so the business performs better?
Yeah. Well, and it was interesting. I was trying to pull apart his description of a friction audit from what I've used in the past is lean process improvement, lean performance improvement, where at least in the basic lean, I'm not a deep lean expert, so if anyone's listening to this who's a lean expert, apologies if I don't get this, all the nuances correct. But basically, as I've used it in the past, it's about mapping out the current process. It's about articulating the value stream that needs to be gleaned from said process, and it's determining what things need either to be removed, improved by efficiency, streamlined, leverage technology, things like that, right? Meant to sort of enhance the process. And that sounded a lot like a friction audit. So one thing that was bummed we didn't have enough time to talk about was trying to pull apart the nuances of a friction audit compared to just something like lean process improvement, because they sounded very similar to me on the surface. Yeah.
Well, and I would say the friction audit has, because it's a 7th chapter, friction audits and the art of simplification. But a lot of it is when we simplify things, we want to get rid of as much friction when we simplify. You just don't want to simplify it and leave the friction in. I know that sounds obvious,
right?
But it's how do you have to figure out what the friction is and can you remove it, and how does that look?
Right. Well, and that's it's funny. A lot of my consulting actually goes around this because I've built products with clients before, leveraging a technology team, and it's funny because I liked his analogies. I was thinking about him a lot recently with one of these projects because you talk to technologists who get really enamored with the technology, right? And we built this really simple, elegant navigation experience for some patients in a health system, healthcare setting, that was built from we're not even trying to assess friction. We're just going all the way back to the source, the patients. What do they want to do, and how do we make that as simple? And we rebuilt it from scratch because we didn't even want to deal with the friction audit because the current scenario was so full of friction there was nothing we could do. And the technology team goes, well, it's too simple. It's not enough here. I'm like, no, really, this is better. Are you sure? We haven't done this. We haven't done this. We haven't done this. Trust me. The client, thrilled. I mean, they're thrilled. I mean, like just the breath of fresh air that the simplicity can provide, like that, the simplification piece, the breath of fresh air that can provide in so many industries that are just convoluted with junk is great.
And what I like about that is some people get too smart for their own good.
Oh.
I just recently came back
I work in healthcare, trust me.
An international conference out in Pittsburgh, and I was there, and I was talking to my buddy, and we were talking, the most brilliant people in this industry were there, and I'm watching them from a coaching and consulting point of view, and it was so difficult to listen to them because they're parsing scientific data, and they're going so deep into the details. I'm like, this stuff's just not going to work in business. It's way too complex. And what I like about what you just said is, how can we simplify it down? And if you ever have, and whoever's listening to this, whatever your business is or whatever you're doing, one of the best things is hang out with someone who doesn't know anything about your business and try to explain your concept to them. If you can do that, you are very, very clear. But if it goes right over their head, you need to figure out, how do I explain this where they can actually understand? I'm not saying forget everything. But so in the friction audit, and this because it's really, one of the things he said was, once upon a time there was blank, every day blank. Now we're talking about situations here.
Okay.
One day blank, because of that blank, because of that blank, until finally blank. If you can fill this in about your company or what the problem is, it really simplifies things. And someone might say, well, Josh, that's way too simple. Exactly.
Yeah. No, sometimes we actually need to err on the side of too much simplicity.
Absolutely. No, if it's too simple and doesn't work, then make it more complex and more detailed. But let's simplify it. So I really like that part of the book. I'm glad you pointed that out.
Yeah, no, I was just glad that that Adam brought it up at the end of our interview with him.
So in addition to the friction audit, what sticks out to you?
We talked a little bit about this in the opening, but I liked his several definitions of stuck, just because it applied to so many things. What was unclear to me, though, and I thought you'd like to chat about this today, was, it was unclear to me how those different versions of stuck in a, you talked about musical stuck, or athletic being stuck, or business-wise being stuck, or intellectually being stuck, or creative stuck. Just to hit on the kind of some of the definitions at a high level, but wasn't quite sure how those topics related to mental health, right? Depression, anxiety, things like that, right? I mean, in terms of, are you stuck because you're actually dealing with a mental health issue, or is the mental health issue actually a result of being stuck? Like, which comes first, right? Chicken and egg sort of question, right? And so how do you sort of layer in the need for, maybe don't be so worried about being stuck, you should just go see a therapist and like take care of yourself, or take some time off, or to our friend Chris Bailey, how to calm your mind, reduce too much screen time in your life, and maybe actually you'll bring down the dopamine levels. So that was the question I was left with.
So I'm going to give this from an executive coach's standpoint.
Yeah.
And it's funny, you'll sometimes go out there and everyone and their sister is a coach. I hate that. But, I ended up with a master's in executive coaching because there is a psychological component. But if you find out, hey, I am stuck, are we dealing with a mental health issue that needs a diagnosis and care from a professional? Or is it something else?
Yeah.
It's complicated. There are a lot of things that come into play.
Yeah.
Did you just overwork yourself too much and not take care of rest, and you just need a Sabbath day? Do you need a nap? Do you need to eat healthier? Do you need to exercise? Or are we dealing with some other issues? So when someone says, what's the mental health on stuck?
Right.
I don't know until we get to a chance to parse it.
Right. No, that's exactly what I was thinking too. It was just this, it's that whole, it'd be interesting to unpack with him more that whole issue.
And I think he would probably say the same thing.
Yeah.
There's a lot of aspect and nuances to things. And one of the things it's funny, a lot of people say, well, here's the one answer. It's never one answer. Typically, it's a lot of things that contribute to an overarching stuckness that happens in business and life.
Yeah. Well, and he did break the book into the 4 parts, right? And I think there was the heart, the head. What was the third one? I can't remember now off the top of my head. Fun enough. And habit, right?
Yeah. Help, heart.
Help. That was the first
Help,
one.
heart, head, and habit.
Yeah. Yeah. So I think there's certainly several elements of psychology in there. So if you think about mental health, I think there's several things around the heart and the head that probably help to provide, illuminate sort of how to pull those apart. But I think that was an area that if I was going to
and from a Christian perspective, we read Psalms and we read Proverbs. It comes from our heart.
Yeah,
you could do everything right business-wise, but if we don't have a great heart, it's gonna be corrupt.
Right. Well, and that's also why I think what I would call habit. We've talked about that on this show a lot. He would call automation. I think that's another reason why that's particularly important in these spaces, because the more you automate, the more things you can eliminate from possible causes. And like, it's like any good study, right? Or any good scientific experiment. You want to, eliminate all the variables, right? So you can just have the one variable or the two. And so the more you eliminate, I think it's also helpful.
And if you look in really high-end professions, let's say a surgeon, or let's look at a pilot, really smart people doing something, they are known for their checklists. Why? You're automating very complex tasks. And some people, well, why should it be so simplified to do an automated task? Well, you don't have a checklist for everything, but you have the main items on a checklist, because if the checklist takes care of it, the brain function goes towards something else.
You can actually solve problems more easily.
Way more easily.
And what did he call? He called that system. What do you call it? System 1 and System 2 thinking. I think is what he talked about. Yeah, the same idea. The more you can push into System 1, the automation. It's like driving in the same route every day. Like, you're not thinking about it. You're thinking about 10 other things, right? Because you know that route, right? The more you can push into that System 1, the better. Right.
And what I liked about his book is, 2 books ago, we went over The Power to Change by Craig Groeschel, which is, we said, hey, great first step self-help book. This would not be that first step book. If you've never read a self-help book, I would not steer someone directly towards this book. This is for the business professional. You're already into things. It's way, way more complex, because he's brilliant. He's talking about case study. It's what does that look like?
I would think this would be a great book for a high-performing team, right? So if you have an executive team that reads books together, studies together, isn't brand new together, right? Like, this is for an established high-performing team. I would not steer this to be like, I have a brand new team. Let's start with this book, right?
One of the things Craig Groeschel was talking about, hey, let's start with your first habit of flossing in the morning.
Right.
I'd agree with that. That's awesome. And that would be great for a baby Christian, my 11-year-old son. Great. Versus Anatomy of a Breakthrough is, hey, you already have a team with 5 to 15 team members. How can you get to that next step when you now have 13 to 50 to 100 team members on your team? What does that look like to scale like that?
Yeah. Well, funny enough, I was allowing it to be there for a second. You know what concept that's from?
No, I don't.
RAIN. So remember, he talked about a program that was originally built to help people who were to overcome smoking, right? And there was the 4 parts to RAIN, right? Recognize what's arising, being obviously in this case like your desire to smoke a cigarette or something else, right? How to basically one of the hardest parts said allowing it to be there. That was interesting. And this wasn't his idea, right? He was quoting some research. But then investigate your emotions and thoughts. That's the I. And then note what is happening from moment to moment. And I found that idea of like allowing it to be there, the discomfort, really challenging. Probably beneficial.
I know you
but I
have
have
a
been
problem
pondering about this before. Why do I have a problem with it?
I was going to ask you. I was going to be my coaching standpoint. Why do you have a problem allowing certain things to be there?
Because I don't like discomfort, and sort of the allowing it to be there is just it's sort of like this settling in of discomfort that you have to live with. It's like in a race.
Correct.
Right? If you're actually running a mile hard, it hurts like crazy.
But let's
or even a 5.
Let's talk a marathon, because most businesses are a marathon.
Yeah, marathon even, right?
So what do you do with the discomfort?
You gotta allow it to be there. You just gotta live with it.
You okay with that?
It hurts.
That's not what I said.
I don't like it.
I said, are you okay with it?
You gotta learn to be, right? You gotta learn to be.
Yes,
he's
you
right.
do have to learn to be.
It was just funny to me going, that sounds really painful. I could just think of all these painful moments in my life. When I read this, I think, okay, you gotta like sit with it. You just gotta be comfortable in the discomfort.
You do.
Yeah. Anyhow, I thought it was very helpful.
It is very helpful, but the fascinating thing is a lot of times we know we have to learn that. Not everyone can do that, though.
Yeah.
You have to learn to understand, I'm going to have to sit in this for a while to figure this thing out. Be okay with it.
And don't move past the step of just allowing it to be, and then like not fixing it or not taking action or not confronting even. Like confronting, maybe you have an argument with another person. You don't have to confront it right away. You got to sit with it, you know.
I would also go so far as to say is, hey, it's going to be here. I don't have an answer right now for it. I'm going to sit on it, and I might get the answer tomorrow. I might actually get the answer in 6 to 12 months. It might take that long to get the answer.
But I would say there's a difference between, and I'm not saying you're doing this, but I know that people could interpret it this way. There's a difference between ignoring it and allowing it to be there.
Oh, absolutely.
Right. So it's like, just because you can't take action today, some people just emotionally detach from it, and they truly like almost mentally forget about it.
But this is where great teams
gotta, like,
acknowledge the reality.
Exactly.
Acknowledge the reality that this is there.
Yeah.
And say, hey, I will look at it again next week.
Right.
That's okay. We're recording this podcast on a Friday. There are a lot of things. I'm not going to have the answer today, but I have put it on my schedule. I'm going to look at it next week.
Right.
Whereas in the old days, when I was in my 30s, I would let it bother me all weekend. I couldn't sit in it.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. I am that way with conflict. I hate sitting in conflict for too long. It just drives me. I'd like to resolve it. It's frustrating as all get out.
That's good. But but you see this, and this way, let's go back to your devotion.
Yeah.
I love the Psalms.
Yeah.
You see God allowing us to sit in things.
Yeah.
We'll talk about the personality side of things in 2 weeks.
Okay.
You know, the personal application aspect
Sure.
of the book, because that gets into that. You know, even Anatomy of a Breakthrough, what does it look like in our personal life?
Right. Right. No, absolutely. Yep. What else we got for today?
Well, from a business standpoint, you know, you have an Anatomy of a Breakthrough. As you're consulting with businesses and leaders, you know, number one thing that would stick out from this book, would it be the friction component that you would take and apply, or
no? I think the number one thing I would tell people to pay attention to is just the physical and emotional effects of being stuck. Mm-hmm. I think that's the first thing to step into. There's several other things that are good, but the first thing to think about is just understanding it's a whole language around what it means to be stuck, what that looks like, what it feels like, how you manage through it, how to overcome it. And I think that's at a core concept, you know, great, helpful idea for people looking for help.
From a coaching standpoint, what I like most about this book is there's actually an anatomy. This is not wishy or just guessing. He's using scientific data. This is what it looks like. Mm-hmm. So a lot of people will come work with me as an executive coach and say, hey, am I unique here? No, good news. You're not unique.
Yeah.
I've heard that same story, a one-off, not verbatim. I've heard it over and over and over and over again. So the great news about this book is he's saying, hey, you know, at least hundreds, probably thousands of leaders in business, there's an anatomy here. Mm-hmm. And you know what Adam did? He wrote a book.
Right.
And we can see it. So then you have to take the book and apply it. But this is really, really good news from not only a coaching standpoint, but a consulting standpoint. You're like, hey, this isn't rocket science.
Right.
How do we optimize this? And he gives some really, really good tools.
Awesome.
So, hey, next week, we're going to dive into business application. So what does this actually look like in an actual high-performing business, or a business that Josh, let's say, would be consulting with? And the week after that would be life application of Anatomy of a Breakthrough. In the meantime, click on the link. Go buy this book on Amazon.com or your favorite bookstore of choice. It's well worth the read. And we'll have the link in the show notes. Adam also has lots of extra links on his personal website, such as the friction audit that he talks about. Definitely go get it. Yep. But in the meantime, hey, whether you're watching this on YouTube, Apple Podcast, Spotify, you name it, do us a favor, leave us a 5-star review, because that helps other people get to the podcast as well too. But until then, looking forward to next week.
Sounds good.